Imagine being able to go back in time and correct all the mistakes of your past. It sounds like a dream, doesn't it? But what if that power brought unexpected consequences? Gabriel, a talented architect, finds a mysterious clock that promises to change his life forever. What begins as a chance for redemption soon turns into a battle between the desire for control and the acceptance of fate. Will Gabriel be able to find the peace he so desperately seeks? Don't miss this story full of surprises, twists, and deep lessons. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and come discover how the past can influence the present in ways you never imagined. Regrets and consequences. The hidden secret of an ancient clock. Gabriel had always been known for his innate talent as an architect. From a young age, he demonstrated a unique ability to imagine and create structures that defied logic and captured the essence of any environment. He was, without a doubt, one of the most promising in his field, and his career was just beginning. But behind the facade of success and confidence was a tormented man, someone who carried the weight of regrets and mistakes that accumulated like shadows in his soul. That afternoon, Gabriel felt the weight of yet another difficult day at work. The constant pressures, client expectations, and demands of grand projects were starting to affect him in ways he could no longer ignore. His mind, usually sharp and full of innovative ideas, was now dulled by exhaustion and emotional fatigue. All he wanted was a moment of peace, a break from the reality that surrounded him and seemed increasingly oppressive. Determined to clear his mind, Gabriel grabbed his coat and left the office without looking back. The city air was fresh, but laden with the aroma of autumn leaves beginning to cover the sidewalks. The streets, still bustling with the frantic pace of late afternoon, seemed to offer a strange comfort. He walked aimlessly, lost in his own thoughts, mentally reliving every mistake he had made and every opportunity he had let slip away. These were the memories that haunted him, the wrong choices that seemed to have changed the course of his life. As his feet guided him through the city, Gabriel found himself in a lesser-known part of town, an old neighborhood where the buildings were low and the streets narrow, almost forgotten by time. Here, the bustle of the center seemed distant, and the environment had an almost surreal quality, as if it were trapped in a different era. The shops were small and peculiar, with dusty windows and old signs. One of them, in particular, caught his attention. The antique shop was hidden between two stores, almost imperceptible to an inattentive eye. The facade was dark wood, with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a forgotten story. The display window was filled with strange and fascinating objects, old clocks, faded maps, and sculptures that seemed to belong to lost civilizations. There was something about the place that stirred the senses, a silent invitation to explore its secrets. Gabriel, driven by an inexplicable curiosity, pushed open the heavy door and entered. The interior of the antique shop was small, but seemed to stretch in all directions, as if defying the laws of space. Dark wooden shelves filled every corner, crammed with old books, exotic artifacts, and relics that told stories of past eras. The smell of old paper and polished wood permeated the air, creating an atmosphere that was both welcoming and mysterious. Gabriel scanned the place with his eyes, absorbing every detail, feeling like he was in a world apart. It was then that he noticed the presence of Mr. Almeida, an elderly man, with an appearance that perfectly matched the dusty environment of the antique shop. His hair was thin and white, falling over his shoulders like threads of silk, and his eyes, though tired, shone with a wisdom that only time could grant. He was behind the counter, absorbed in an old book, but when he noticed Gabriel's presence, he lifted his head and smiled enigmatically. "Welcome, young man," said Mr. Almeida, with a soft but firm voice. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" Gabriel hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He himself didn't quite know what had drawn him there. Perhaps it was the atmosphere of the place, or maybe it was something deeper, an unconscious search for something he didn't yet understand. "I'm just exploring," he replied, trying to hide the unease in his voice. Mr. Almeida observed Gabriel with interest, as if he could see beyond the words, as if he knew there was more behind the visit. "This is a place for those who seek more than just old objects," he said, his eyes never leaving Gabriel's. Here we collect stories, memories, and sometimes secrets that time has tried to hide. Intrigued, Gabriel looked around once more, feeling that there was something special about the place. "What kind of secrets?" he asked, his curiosity now fully awakened. The antique dealer smiled, a smile that was both welcoming and enigmatic. "Secrets that belong to the past, but can influence the future," he said, as he turned to a shelf behind him. After a moment of searching, he retrieved an object and placed it on the counter in front of Gabriel. "Here is something that may interest you." Gabriel looked at the object, an old pocket watch with a beautiful golden metal casing, adorned with intricate engraved designs. It was a piece of art, clearly from another time, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it had been waiting long to be discovered. "This watch," Mr. Almeida continued, "has a special story. It is said to have the power to alter past events." The antique dealer's words hung in the air, laden with a meaning that Gabriel was still trying to comprehend. "Alter the past," he repeated, his mind struggling to process the idea. It seemed impossible, something out of a legend or a fairy tale. And yet, there was something in the way Mr. Almeida spoke, something in his expression, that made Gabriel believe there was more to the story than he could imagine. "Yes," replied the antique dealer, with a tone of seriousness. "But remember, young man, time is a delicate web. Toying with the past can bring unexpected consequences. Changes are not always for the better." Gabriel felt a chill run down his spine, a mix of excitement and fear. The idea of being able to alter the events that haunted him was tempting, but Almeida's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the dangers involved. Even so, something inside him, a part that longed for a chance to correct his mistakes, drove him to accept the watch. "How much does it cost?" he asked, already decided. Mr. Almeida watched him for a long moment before answering. "This watch has no monetary price. It costs something more valuable, your peace of mind. But if you are willing to pay the price, it is yours." Gabriel hesitated, but only for an instant. He knew he was about to embark on a dangerous journey, but the temptation to correct the mistakes of the past was too strong to resist. He carefully picked up the watch, feeling the cold weight of the metal in his hand. With a nod to Mr. Almeida, he thanked him and left the antique shop, taking the mysterious artifact with him. As he walked back home, the watch seemed to pulse in his pocket, as if it were alive. Gabriel didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He had crossed an invisible boundary, and nothing would ever be the same again. Gabriel arrived home still under the impact of the strange visit to the antique shop. The pocket watch he now carried seemed to weigh more than its size suggested, as if the metal held not just time, but also the promises and dangers that came with it. He closed the door behind him and stood still for a moment in the dim light of his apartment, listening to the silence. The sense of unreality that had accompanied him since leaving the shop persisted, as if the world around him had changed in some subtle but fundamental way. He took the watch out of his pocket and placed it on the table, observing the object under the soft glow of the lamp. The golden metal gleamed, and the intricate engravings seemed to move slightly, as if alive. Gabriel felt a mix of excitement and fear, and for a moment, he considered the possibility that Mr. Almeida was playing a trick on him, that it was just an old piece and nothing more. But something inside him, an intuition he couldn't ignore, led him to believe otherwise. He believed that the watch truly possessed the power to alter the past. He walked over to the window and looked down at the city, illuminated by the lights of cars and buildings. The night was calm, but Gabriel's mind was restless. He thought about the past few months of his life, the decisions he had made at work, the missed opportunities. There was one decision in particular that troubled him deeply, a choice he had made hastily, without considering all the consequences, which had resulted in an important project being rejected by the clients. The project in question was a proposal to renovate a historic building, a work he had planned with great anticipation. Gabriel had been pressured to take a more commercial approach, and in yielding to that pressure, he ended up compromising the integrity of the project. When the client rejected the proposal, it dealt a blow to his confidence, and since then, he had been questioning his ability to make the right decisions. The humiliation of having his work criticized, and worse, discarded, was something he couldn't forget. That failure had become a turning point in his career. Since then, Gabriel felt as if he was in a free fall, unable to regain lost ground. It was this wound that the watch, with its mysterious powers, promised to heal. Gabriel knew that time couldn't be rewritten without consequences, but the temptation was irresistible. If he could correct that one mistake, perhaps he could regain control of his life, restore his confidence, and move forward without the burden of regret. With that decision made, Gabriel picked up the watch from the table. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the crown of the watch, setting the time. He focused on the date of the mistake, clearly visualizing the exact moment when he made the wrong decision. Part of him still doubted the watch's effectiveness, but another part, the part desperate to fix what was broken, believed fervently. He closed his eyes and pressed the button on the side of the watch. Immediately, a sensation of dizziness hit him, as if the world around him was spinning, dissolving, and reconstructing itself differently. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his apartment but in the office. At the exact moment he had made that fateful decision, everything seemed so real, as if time had truly rolled back, as if he was living that day again. Gabriel looked around, recognizing every detail: the plants in the corner of the room, the papers stacked on the desk, and the wall clock showing the same time as the watch in his hands. His heart raced, but he knew what he needed to do. This time, he would act differently. Instead of yielding to the pressure from the client and colleagues, he followed his intuition, defending the integrity of the project with passion and conviction. His words were firm, confident, and for the first time in a long time, he felt in control. At the end of the meeting, the client, impressed by Gabriel's determination, accepted his proposal. The sense of triumph was immediate and powerful. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and he could breathe again, free from guilt and regret. Gabriel knew that if the watch had indeed worked, this was the change he needed to turn the tide in his life. When the dizziness returned, he found himself back in his apartment, the watch still in his hand. But now something was different. The atmosphere around him felt lighter, brighter. He felt a calm he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense that, finally, things were falling into place. The next day, Gabriel woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. When he arrived at work, he immediately noticed the changes. His colleagues greeted him with more enthusiasm than usual, and there was an air of respect around him that hadn't existed before. He was called into a meeting with the higher-ups, who congratulated him on the excellent work on the project and the client's approval. It was exactly what he had envisioned when he decided to use the watch. His career seemed to be taking off, and the confidence that had once disappeared now returned in full force. But as Gabriel would soon discover, tampering with time doesn't come without a price. In the days that followed, he began to notice small changes in his personal life, things that hadn't been there before. Isabel, his girlfriend, seemed more distant, less engaged in their conversations and the moments they spent together. She mentioned being worried about the future, but Gabriel, still absorbed in his recent success, didn't pay much attention. He believed that the changes at work would eventually improve all aspects of his life, but he wasn't prepared for the new tensions that were beginning to emerge. Isabel's change in behavior was subtle at first, but it intensified over time. Small arguments began to turn into more serious fights, and Gabriel, consumed by the demands of his rising career, couldn't understand what was happening. Unknowingly, he was creating a distance between them, a distance that the watch, with all its powers, couldn't fix. More and more, Gabriel found himself absorbed in work, neglecting moments of intimacy and connection with Isabel. The nights they once spent together, talking about dreams and plans, were now filled with reports, projects, and endless meetings. The watch, which promised to fix his mistakes, was beginning to create new problems he didn't know how to solve. As Gabriel navigated the sea of praise and success at work, the turbulent waves in his personal life continued to grow. He was about to discover that no matter how much he tried to control time, there were things that couldn't be predicted or altered, things that required more than simple corrections to the past. The watch in his hands was a powerful tool, but Gabriel still had much to learn about the true consequences of tampering with fate. Gabriel felt like a chess player, skillfully moving his pieces and anticipating the opponent's moves. The watch, now his constant companion, was the key to this new ability to manipulate time. Each adjustment, each small change to the past, seemed to bring an immediate improvement to his life. But like the player who focuses only on the pieces in front of him, Gabriel was beginning to lose sight of the entire board. He was so absorbed in the power the watch granted him that he didn't see the invisible threads connecting each of his actions, weaving a web of unforeseen consequences. After correcting the error in the work project, Gabriel found himself increasingly tempted to use the watch for other changes. At first, these were small adjustments, like going back in time to say the right thing in a meeting or to avoid a disagreement with a colleague. These corrections brought immediate benefits: praise from his boss, increased client confidence, and a reputation for being almost infallible in his work. But it wasn't long before Gabriel started using the watch to alter aspects of his personal life. One of the first changes Gabriel attempted was in his relationship with Isabel. Since he had begun using the watch, he had noticed a growing distance between them. Arguments that had once been minor now seemed inevitable, and moments of intimacy and mutual understanding had become scarce. Gabriel, believing he could fix everything with a watch, decided to avoid one of these arguments by going back in time and changing what he had said to Isabel. At that moment, it felt like a victory. The argument never happened, and the night passed in a calm, almost perfect way. Isabel smiled more, and Gabriel felt a wave of relief. But the peace was short-lived. The next day, Gabriel noticed something different about Isabel. She seemed more distant, more closed off, as if a part of her had withdrawn from him. He tried to talk to her, but her responses were monosyllabic, and the coldness in her eyes unsettled him. He tried to understand what had gone wrong. Before using the watch, Isabel had always expressed her concerns and feelings, and although this sometimes led to arguments, it also created a deep connection between them. Now, without the arguments, it seemed she was keeping everything to herself, and Gabriel felt increasingly unable to reach her. As days passed, Gabriel began to notice a pattern. Each time he used the watch to avoid a fight or change a small decision, something in his relationship with Isabel deteriorated. He was erasing past mistakes, but he was also erasing the moments when they both learned and grew together. Without those challenges, the relationship, which had once been built on a foundation of mutual understanding and overcoming obstacles, began to weaken. But Gabriel was still not ready to give up on the watch. In his mind, there was still a belief that he could control the consequences, that with enough adjustments, everything would return to its proper place. And so, he began using the watch more frequently and for more significant changes. He went back in time to correct a mistake he had made in an important project months earlier, a mistake that had caused delays and tensions within the team. When he returned to the present, the situation seemed to have improved. The project was progressing smoothly, and the team was satisfied. However, this change brought with it a new set of problems. The project, now ahead of schedule, began attracting more attention from superiors, who demanded that Gabriel take on greater responsibility. He found himself overwhelmed with new tasks and impossible deadlines. The pressure started to affect him, and he realized that by trying to avoid a problem in the past, he had created an even bigger crisis in the present. Furthermore, the small corrections he had made in his relationships with colleagues began to alter the office dynamics. A co-worker with whom he had avoided a conflict now seemed suspicious and reserved, as if sensing that something was amiss. Another, who had once been an ally, began to compete with him, creating an atmosphere of rivalry that Gabriel didn't know how to manage. The watch, which had initially seemed like a blessing, was becoming a curse. Each change Gabriel made in the past seemed to solve an immediate problem, but created other, larger, more complex issues in the present. It was as if he was trying to patch holes in a dike, only to see new holes open up around him. Most concerning of all was what was happening between him and Isabel. She seemed increasingly distant, as if an invisible barrier had risen between them. Gabriel tried to reach across this barrier, but it seemed to grow with each passing day. He began to question whether there was a point of no return, a moment when he could no longer fix what was broken between them. One night, after a particularly cold argument, Gabriel found himself alone in the living room. holding the watch in his hands. He looked at the object as if searching for answers, but all he found were more questions. He began to wonder if Mr. Almeida knew the consequences of tampering with time, if he had any reason for selling the watch to Gabriel. Gabriel got up and went to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights shone, indifferent to his internal dilemmas. He knew he was at a critical juncture. Continuing to use the watch could mean losing everything he had gained, but stopping now would be to admit that he was on an irreversible path, one where he had traded precious moments for an illusion of control. Deep down, Gabriel began to realize an uncomfortable truth. Time could not be controlled, at least not in the way he was trying. Every moment, every decision, every mistake was part of a larger whole, something that could not be rearranged without consequences. The watch, with all its power, was not a tool to fix the past, but a reminder that the past was immutable and that the real challenge was to accept and learn from it. As he looked out at the horizon, Gabriel made a decision. He needed to stop trying to control time. He needed to stop using the watch to fix what had already happened and start facing the consequences of his actions, both past and present. But he knew that the journey to undo what he had already done would not be easy, and that some things might already be beyond his reach to correct. The watch, once shining with a promise of power, now felt like a burden in his hands. Gabriel knew that, to move forward, he needed to find a way to free himself from it, and from the illusions it brought. Gabriel was in a constant state of anguish. The changes he had made, in the hope of creating a perfect life, had turned into a series of interconnected disasters, leaving him trapped in a spiral of regrets even greater than those he had originally sought to correct. The weight of the watch in his pocket was a constant reminder of the power he possessed, but also of the devastating consequences that this power had unleashed. He felt like he was on the brink of an abyss, where each decision could lead him deeper into a pit of darkness and regret. That night, unable to find peace, Gabriel decided it was time to seek out Mr. Almeida. He needed answers, needed to understand why the watch, which had promised so much, was destroying his life. The mysterious antique shop where he had found the watch seemed to be the only source of enlightenment, the only chance to reverse the changes he had caused. Crossing the city with quick steps, Gabriel noticed how everything around him seemed devoid of life. The streets, once familiar, now felt strange, as if he were in a slightly displaced world where every detail was a bit out of place. He wondered if this was a reflection of his own existence, distorted by his attempts to control the uncontrollable. When he arrived at the antique store, Gabriel stopped in front of the door, hesitating. The store's facade, which had once seemed merely old and dusty, now carried an aura of mystery and danger. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and entered. The interior of the store was dark, illuminated only by a soft light emanating from a few old lamps scattered around the place. The smell of aged wood and old paper filled the air, and the silence was so profound that Gabriel could hear his own breathing echoing softly off the walls. He took a few hesitant steps toward the counter, where Mr. Almeida sat, as if waiting for him. "I knew you'd come back, Gabriel," said the old antique dealer, not even looking up from the book he was reading. His voice was calm, almost paternal, but carried a gravity that made Gabriel shiver. "I need to understand what's happening," Gabriel began, his voice trembling with anxiety. "The watch, it's ruining my life. I thought I could fix my mistakes, but all I've done is create new problems. Is there any way to undo this? To go back to how it was before?" Mr. Almeida finally looked up, slowly closing the book before fixing Gabriel with a penetrating gaze. "Did you really think you could manipulate time without paying a price? The watch wasn't made to improve anyone's life, Gabriel. It was created to teach a fundamental lesson about the nature of time and choices." "A lesson?" Gabriel repeated, confused and frustrated. "What lesson could be more important than fixing the mistakes that have ruined my life?" Almeida sighed, as if he had had this conversation countless times before. "Time is a continuous line, Gabriel. Every moment, every decision, forms the fabric of your life. When you try to undo what's already been done, you're not just erasing the mistake. You're erasing everything that came with it, the lessons, the growth, and most importantly, the essence of who you are." The watch was created to teach that the past cannot be controlled without consequences. You're trying to erase parts of your life, and in doing so, you're losing yourself. The antique dealer's words pierced deeply into Gabriel. He had never considered that by changing the past, he might be erasing not just mistakes, but also the experiences that shaped him. Every failure, every regret, was part of his story. Without them, who was he? And what would happen if he continued trying to fix the past? But what now? Gabriel asked, despair taking over his voice. I've ruined everything. Isabel, my work, my life is falling apart. How can I undo this? Mr. Almeida leaned forward, his serious gaze fixed on Gabriel. You're at a crossroads, Gabriel. You can continue to use the watch, hoping to fix things. But the more you try to control time, the further you'll drift from reality. Or you can accept that the past is immutable, that mistakes are part of who you are, and that the only way forward is to live in the present, accepting the consequences and learning to be better in the future. Gabriel felt the weight of these words. He now understood that the watch, far from being a gift, was a trap, a tool that kept him locked in a cycle of endless attempts at correction, leading him further from the truth of his own existence. He faced an impossible choice. Continue using the watch and lose himself completely, or abandon it and face the consequences of his past actions without the illusion of control. The watch, which had seemed so precious when he acquired it, now felt like an unbearable burden. Gabriel felt a mix of sadness and resignation as he realized that his quest for perfection had destroyed what he most valued. He looked at Mr. Almeida, seeking one last piece of guidance. So, what should I do? Gabriel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Almeida slowly stood up and walked to a shelf behind the counter, retrieving a small wooden case. He placed the case on the counter and opened it, revealing a cushioned, empty compartment. Put the watch here, Gabriel. Leave it behind and accept that time cannot be changed. The only way to heal the wounds of the past is by facing them, not by trying to erase them. Gabriel looked at the watch in his hands. It had become such a central part of his life over the past few weeks that leaving it behind seemed impossible. But at the same time, he knew that continuing to use it meant destroying everything that remained of his true self. With a deep sigh, Gabriel placed the watch in the case and closed it. The sound of the latch clicking was like the closing of a painful chapter of his life. Mr. Almeida took the case and put it back on the shelf, saying no more. Now go home, Gabriel, Almeida said gently. Face the consequences of your actions, rebuild what you can, and accept what cannot be changed. That is the true lesson of time. Gabriel left the antique store with a sense of emptiness, but also with a renewed understanding of his own life. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in weeks, he felt he was in control, not of time, but of himself. And that, he realized, was all that truly mattered. Gabriel walked back home, with the weight of the past weeks finally lifted. The decision to leave the watch behind at Almeida's antique store was a difficult one. But now, as he crossed the city streets, he felt a new sense of clarity. It was as if a heavy cloud had lifted, allowing him to see life as it truly was, full of uncertainties, mistakes, and above all, opportunities for growth. Arriving at his apartment, Gabriel took a moment to observe the place he had neglected during his obsession with the watch. The walls, which had once seemed cold and impersonal, now felt warm, a refuge where he could start anew. The memories, both good and bad, that the apartment held were a constant reminder that life is a collection of experiences that, together, shape who we are. He ran his fingers over the furniture, feeling the cool touch of the wood, and allowed himself a smile as he thought about how far he had come. All he had wanted was to erase mistakes, but in trying to do so, he had nearly destroyed what truly mattered in his life. Now, he knew it was time to begin rebuilding what he had lost. The first person he needed to reconcile with was Isabel. Since he had started using the watch, their relationship had deteriorated. He remembered all the arguments, the growing distances, and the unspoken words that had created an invisible barrier between them. But now, without the watch to interfere, Gabriel knew it was time to face the truth, both his own and Isabel's. He picked up the phone and, with a deep sigh, dialed Isabel's number. The line rang a few times before she answered, and the sound of her voice, initially hesitant, made Gabriel realize how much he missed her. "Isabel," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "I know things between us have been difficult. I made many mistakes and tried to fix them the wrong way. I was trying to control the uncontrollable, and ended up pushing you and everything important to me away." On the other end of the line, Isabel remained silent for a moment before responding, her voice soft and cautious. "Gabriel, I missed you, but you distanced yourself so much. I didn't know how to reach you." Gabriel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Isabel's words. "I was lost, Isabel, but now I understand that I can't change the past, and I don't want to try anymore. I want to focus on the present, on us, and do my best from here on out. If you're still willing to try, I want to win you back." Isabel hesitated, but there was a softness in her voice when she replied, "Gabriel, I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to help you out of that dark place you were in. If you're willing to try, then I'm here with you." Isabel's words were like a balm to Gabriel's soul. He felt a new hope growing inside him, one that wasn't based on illusions of control, but on acceptance and love. "Thank you, Isabel. I won't let you down." They arranged to meet that night, and Gabriel hung up the phone feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. There was much to be said, many wounds to heal, but he knew he was on the right path. Before heading out to meet Isabel, Gabriel went to a small table where he kept some precious mementos. Among them was a photo of him and Isabel, taken early in their relationship, when everything seemed simple and full of promise. He smiled as he looked at the photo, recognizing that despite the challenges they had faced, they were still together, still fighting for what they had. With the photo in hand, Gabriel did something symbolic. He opened the window of his apartment and breathed in the fresh night air, looking out at the city stretched before him. He threw away the last piece of the puzzle that connected him to the watch, the need for control. The photo wasn't discarded, but rather the idea that he needed to control the future to be happy. Gabriel realized that by accepting the uncertainties and imperfections of life, he was truly embracing the real beauty of the present. The present, with all its flaws, was still a gift, something he was ready to cherish. That night, Gabriel and Isabel met at a small cafe, the same one where they had their first date. The place, with its cozy and familiar atmosphere, seemed the perfect setting for a new beginning. Sitting across from each other, they talked like they hadn't in a long time. They laughed, cried, and above all, reconnected. Isabel looked at Gabriel, her eyes filled with understanding and affection. "I knew the man I loved was still there. I was just waiting for him to come back." Gabriel held her hand, feeling the warmth and familiarity of that touch. "I'm here now, Isabel, and I promise I'll cherish every moment we have." As the night went on, Gabriel felt at peace for the first time in months. He knew the journey ahead would still be full of challenges, but now he was armed with the understanding that life didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. Every mistake, every wrong choice had shaped him, and instead of trying to erase them, he was ready to learn from them. At the end of the evening, Isabel smiled and looked at the clock on the cafe wall. "It's getting late, Gabriel. I think it's time for us to go." Gabriel nodded, but instead of feeling the usual fear of the future, he felt eager to embrace what was to come. He stood up, helped Isabel put on her coat, and hand in hand, they left together, ready to face whatever time had in store for them. That night, as he lay down to sleep, Gabriel looked up at the ceiling and smiled. For the first time, he didn't wish to change anything. He had made his final choice, and was ready to live each moment, with all its uncertainties and beauties. After all, as he had finally understood, true happiness didn't come from control, but from acceptance. And that, he knew, was the greatest lesson time could teach.